Waste, as we all know, is of various kinds and creates all kinds of problems, solid, liquid, and of course, gaseous waste in the form of carbon dioxide, which is creating havoc with our climate. We are going to hear about particular waste problems today. Just to ask you, after the panelists have shared their views and their ideas, that you raise your views and become actively engaged in the conversation and the debate. So I wouldn't take any more of your time. I would turn it over now to my colleague, Professor Aparna Agarwal, who will lead the panel and will introduce the panelists and all of that. So Aparna, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Naresh. So as you all know, we are here to discuss contemporary waste crisis. So before we start, I'll quickly introduce our speakers. So first, we have Professor Kaveri Gill. She is based at Center for Excellence Himalayan Studies, Shivnatha Institute of Eminence. So Professor Kaveri, her research is situated. So her research is situated within development studies and is critically influenced by heterodox economics, political economy, and interdisciplinary perspective. She's published widely, including a field-building monograph on waste of poverty and plastic, scavenging and scrap trading entrepreneurs in India's informal economy. For most of us who work on waste in India, Professor Kaveri's work has become a landmark study. And I mean, when you're working on waste in India, that's one of the first book one literally starts with. Then we have Mr. Ravi Agarwal. So Ravi is founder director of Toxic Links. Ravi is an artist, writer, curator, and founder director of Toxic Links, an environmental NGO that has pioneered work in the domains of chemical safety, toxin, waste, health, and waste management over the last 2 decades. Then we have Dr. Rahul K. Sharma. Rahul is a research fellow at the University College London. He currently works primarily on state capacities, state citizen relations, and administrative reforms. With respect to waste, he's worked extensively on decentralized methods of waste management, composting, right of waste workers, and has conducted several training programs for state-level bureaucrats on the appropriate management and disposal of solid waste. And then finally, we have Mr. Shashi Bhushan Pandit. So Shashi is the founder of Harit Recycler Association and has been working with waste workers for the last 16 years. Currently, HRA is an implementation partner of UNDP for Plastic Waste Management Program, where UNDP is in partnership with Hindustan Coca-Cola Beverage Private Limited and is also working in collaboration with Patna Municipal Corporation in Patna City. Okay, and also Shashi is one of the most, in my knowledge, when I started my fieldwork in Delhi, he's the one who's most well versed in the field of waste in Delhi. So I believe it's very difficult to start your fieldwork or any sort of research in Delhi without contacting Shashi. So thank you, Shashi, for basically pushing me into the world of waste and letting me know what it is about. So before we start, I would just and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm really sorry.
No, I think you're wrong. Since we are a small number, maybe we can introduce themselves.
All right. Okay. So maybe we can do a quick round of introduction with all the attendees. Do we then maybe need a mic for that?
You have a roving mic? They just take it over there and they will pass it over. Start from that, yes. Thank you. Start from the end and then it will go better.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gaurav. I'm from Ambedkar University. I'm currently a master's student. I'm doing master's in environment and development. So I'm glad to be here to have this opportunity to discuss this. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Yashita. I'm also from Ambedkar University, Delhi, and I'm doing my master's in sociology there.
Hello, my name is Carolina. I did my MPhil in Development Studies at the Oxford Department of International Development, where I met Aparna. And I'm currently working with Seva Bharat, which is the development wing of the Self-Employed Women Association.
Hi, I'm Prerna. I am a historian and I am a postdoc fellow at Center for Modern Indian Studies in Göttingen, Germany.
I am Brajesh Gopalan. I am doing MTech from Jamia.
Hi everyone, Nishant this side. I'm interested in aspects of how humans have almost succeeded in creating an ecosystem, although unfortunately of waste in many of our cities. And I'm a faculty based at Ambedkar University, Delhi, and we have just started scratching the surface. And I'll be happy to join you. Thank you.
Hello, I am Milindo. I am a faculty at Jindal Global School of Public Policy and Government. I had the opportunity of working with Professor Elinor Ostrom for about 9 years and to understand the linkage between social science and environmental science. So that's why I am here today. I generally engage in my school with the issue of evaluation and monitoring. Thank you.
Hi, I am BP Agrawal. I am advocate at Delhi High Court.
Hello everyone, I'm Navneet Kumar. I am a co-founder of an organization called PAUSE Web Sustainability Research Foundation. So PAUSE essentially expands to people, animals and waste systems, and I have co-founded it with my longtime friend, Dr. Nishant over here. So just looking forward to hearing more from the eminent personalities in the room. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Harsh and I'm an undergraduate student from Delhi University. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Devesh Gupta and I run an organization called Emerge, where we work with students in schools and colleges on consciousness change and self-transformation. And I've been also working with Naresh sir, and we are recently setting up a network called Spirituality, Science and Public Policy, where we are looking at convergence of all of these three to advance into the world. Thank you.
One more mic is over here.
Okay.
Your presentations and discussions will be about an hour.
That's the idea. Okay, thank you everyone for introducing yourselves. So, when we talk about waste, we mostly talk about it from a very managerial perspective to do away with it. In today's talk, what we are going to do is we are going to unpack various aspects of waste, then bring it all together and then think about what are the possible quote unquote sustainable solutions one can have. So, to start with, waste today, as we know, has become a major challenge of our times. Simply the fact that its visibility and ubiquitous presence perturb us at an aesthetic, environmental, and social, and by here social, I mean in terms of caste and notions of purity and pollution, and at a political level. And political, I mean in terms of waste management, it speaks volumes about the multidimensional nature of the issue. It's not that waste management has become a challenge only in contemporary times. The issue has been plaguing us for many centuries. If we dig deeper into the history, we find that landfills and waste receptacles have been around for very long. Similarly, with respect to India's context, in colonial times, management of municipal waste was a major concern. Delhi State Archives tell us how respatializing of waste from civil lines area and walled city of Delhi, finding a faraway dump site and appropriate technology for managing cities' waste became a daunting task for the British government. And not surprisingly, we continue to face similar challenges in today's time. Even though Delhi is currently surrounded by three major landfills, as many of you might already know, Bhalaswa, Ghazipur, Okhla, and now the fourth one, the Tehkan landfill, the city continues to face severe crisis. And if we speak of Delhi, so there are so many technological and managerial developments going on around Delhi's waste management. However, we still continue to face the crisis. So let's try and understand why is that so. So in today's time, waste crisis has has acquired a particular significance because of its sheer quantity and materiality of discarded materials. And by materiality, I mean the nature of waste materials, that is wet and dry waste. Much of these changes arguably can be accorded to capitalist-led urbanization and growing consumerism. So as per CPCB report of 2021, in India we generate around 1,60,000 tons of waste per day, and this is mostly municipal waste, and around 11,000 tons per day in Delhi. Nearly 62.5% of this waste, amounting to 7,086 tons, is processed daily in its waste to energy plants, as said by the Delhi Pollution Control Committee. However, according to Down to Earth report, it reveals that the 3 dump sites in Delhi continue to receive 6,000 tons of fresh waste almost on daily basis, which is unsegregated. Given this context, we plan to discuss the issue of waste crisis from various angles and deliberate on what could be the possible solutions. Before we head into the discussions by the other speakers, I would like to briefly draw upon Municipal Solid Waste Management Rules 2016 and implication they have had on managing or governing present-day waste crisis. The first set of Municipal Waste Management Rules 2000 were a result of public interest litigation filed by Almitra Patel, that is the Almitra Patel versus Union of India case in 1996. These were first set of rules on solid waste and were the most used ones and the important ones. These rules were further worked upon and led to the enactment of Municipal Solid Waste Management Rules 2016. The rules extensively discuss about segregation of waste at source, integration of informal waste workers in the formalized workforce, decentralized composting. Say, for example, Part 6, Section 4 of the rules say, all resident welfare and market associations shall, within 1 year from the date of notification of these rules and in partnership with local body, should ensure segregation of waste at source by the generators as prescribed in these rules, and further facilitate collection of segregate waste in separate streams and hand over recyclable materials to either the authorized waste pickers or authorized recyclers. But alas, much of this remains a paper tiger. With respect to solid waste management rules, there cannot be one particular story about the implementation of the rules. Different states have different sub-rules and action plans in place. However, if one focuses on the implementation of the rules in 2016 rules and the processes at large with respect to Delhi, it gives us a very grim picture. Most of the households, they continue to dispose unsegregated waste. As per the data of Down to Earth, segregation at source varies from 10 to 90%. However, based on my fieldwork in a ward in Northwest Delhi, most households did not segregate their waste at source. And according to Times of India report, only 12 of 250 wards in Delhi are witnessing 100% segregation. Similarly, observing the plight of informal waste workers in cities, it's evident the 2016 rules have fallen short of their promises. Far from being integrated in the formal workforce, with the increasing privatization of municipal solid waste services, many informal waste workers are denied access to the waste materials, which is their primary mode of livelihood. So the privatization of waste management services started in 2005. It was carried out in 3 phases and is still ongoing. The first phase began in 2005 when private firms were contracted to transport waste from transfer stations to landfills. The second phase of reform was marked by the introduction of incinerators. So instead of segregating and recycling the city's trash, most municipal authorities opted for incineration. The city presently has 3 incinerator facilities, that is Okhla, Ghazipur and Bhavana. And the third phase, that is the present phase, includes the household collection of trash via public-private partnership, from here on PPP, transporting it to local receptacles, compressing it, and then transferring it either to landfill facilities or incinerator facilities. This ensures substantial control over cities' trash, which is then incinerated in waste-to-energy plants to generate electricity. These infrastructural and technological changes were introduced to accelerate cities' metabolism vis-a-vis its waste crisis and project a clean and green image. So when we are talking about these issues of privatization, it's not merely an institutional change, it's a change of urban metabolism, because it then defines to whom the waste materials are going to. However, even with the introduction of private waste management services in last 7 years, Delhi continues to struggle with its waste crisis. Moreover, as iterated above, with the introduction of these reforms, especially in the third phase, the conditions of informal workers deteriorated. The unsaid competition of garbage collection between the PPP agencies and informal waste workers pushed informal waste workers at the further lower end of the informal economy. Soon, waste pickers started getting harassed by the local police and municipal authorities. The PPP companies started surveilling the presence of waste workers by forcing them to mark their attendance at local receptacles. Many such techniques were deployed to control the movement and garbage collection of informal workers. In line with this, the current condition of garbage collectors, and when I talk about garbage collectors, the category is little bit different from that of waste pickers. Most garbage collectors who are working for the PPP companies were earlier sanitation workers who worked with the government and were basically what we say is sarkari karamchari. They're primarily from the Valmiki community, and their situation is equally distressing. Not only their jobs are now completely contractualized as against permanent government jobs offered to sanitation workers, the very structure of PPP in waste management reinforces a certain kind of casteism. So if one looks at the whole PPP model in Delhi, who are the people who are collecting garbage and who are the people who are running the trash trucks? So the ones who are basically driving the trash trucks are from relatively upper caste communities, and the ones who are collecting garbage are from the Valmiki community. And then of course there is a difference between how they're getting paid. So the truck drivers are getting paid more than the waste collectors. So it is also telling us what kind of skills are prioritized over the others. And furthermore, quite surprisingly or rather not, nowhere in the solid waste management rules one finds the mention of the term caste. Given India's intricate past and present marked by caste dynamics and societal perception of certain tasks as defiled and as stigmatized, renders any discourse on waste management policy inherently unfinished. Last but not the least, I would like to throw light on the conception of value struggles around the issues of waste management, particularly the economic and ecological aspect, because the two really cannot be separated from each other. And when I talk about the conception of value struggles, I'm borrowing from Professor Vinay Gidwani. With the ongoing waste management processes, there's an inherent aspect of profit-oriented value attached, which in case of Delhi and many other cities takes the form of incineration. Now, many of us are aware that how harmful incineration is, because it releases all sorts of toxic gases, like nitrous oxide, carbon monoxide, and is carcinogenic in nature. Most PPP companies, when they collect waste, they get tipping fee for collecting waste, certain amount of waste. Post collection, they either dump their waste at landfill sites or send it for incineration. And when we dump waste at landfill sites, then it leads to the release of methane. So in the process, they break the cycle of circular economy, reducing the access of discarded materials for waste pickers and consequently discouraging more environment-friendly options. Given this, one can safely argue that the lure for profit and processes of capital accumulation by converting waste materials into electricity shape these decisions rather than environmental consideration or that of waste pickers who are actually deploying environmental friendly sustainable methods in dealing with discarded materials. One can make similar argument in case of land value of landfills. It is no surprise that all three landfills in Delhi are located on the city's periphery. Their invisibility peripheral location, and low real estate value, becomes a viable option for municipal corporation to designate these sites as sites of landfill. Here, invisibilization and peripheralization often become synonymous with waste management, and the concomitant deleterious ecological effects are conveniently forgotten and obliterated till the time they surface yet again to catch the public's eye. So just to wrap it up, I would say that in order to comprehensively understand the issues of waste management, one will have to go beyond the aspects of physical and ritual cleanliness and think about it in terms of bringing together aspects of consumerism, spaces of materials, casted lives of waste workers, and the aspects of social and natural environment. So now I'll invite our speakers to further take forward this talk. We'll first have Ravi Agarwal, who's going to speak on the ecological aspect of contemporary waste crisis. And Ravi is going to bring together both the ecology and the social and show us that how we cannot we cannot just simply understand the ecological or the social. They are both related to each other. So over to you, Ravi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I was hearing you, and thank you for inviting me, Aparna, and greetings to Kaveri and to Shashi. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, owing to some travel challenges. But I just want to, in the next, I think, 20 minutes, I guess. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, I want to raise an issue which is actually talks about materials, because when we think of waste, we think of an aggregated term. Actually, we are really talking of very disaggregated materials. And I think a lot of the work we've done in the last 25 years on waste has been about disaggregating these materials and seeing what these materials really are. Because when we think of waste now, it is actually an opportunity for natural sciences and social sciences to think together. Because this is not an isolated problem. And of course, when we think of circular economy, there are several challenges besides methane. And one of the challenges is about the issue of material toxicity. And this is really unspoken about as much as it should be, because it drives both technology, standards, cost of technology, and also health impacts and the way these are dealt with in regulation and standards. So I'll just speak a bit about that as a contribution to what the other speakers I know will have a lot to contribute to say, as that this needs to be and increasingly being taken into account, but needs to be taken into account because it has severe implications on health and health and livelihood both, because of both of across the board, but also because of the very vulnerable people who are working with waste. So, there are the materials we use today are very, very wide ranging. And in fact, the first segregation came because of Toxics Link work in 1996, when we started looking at biomedical waste. And the segregation of waste streams based on hazard started in 1996. So the first national law was the biomedical waste law, which was in 1996, followed by the municipal lead acid battery and the municipal waste law in 2000. And one of the outcomes, one of the pressures was part of what Almita Patel's case, but also a case before that, Dr. B.L. Vadera's case, which was already on in 1996. So there are the segregation of waste streams is based on the nature of the waste itself, and that's somehow dealing with the idea of hazard. But when we think of, because many of the things you have spoken about are very important and have been spoken about for many, many years, but can we really think of waste without thinking of the material economy per se? Because waste, to my mind, is an outcome, is a dump of capital production. Without the consumption production economy, without waste, it cannot exist. It is a natural outcome of it. And when we think of sustainability in a broader sense, and for example, in the tipping points of the global environmental condition or crisis, as you might call it, chemicalization of the environment is one of the 9 tipping points. There are in these materials which are used, which range from all kinds of materials you can think of. There are several thousand chemicals in use today. And of course, depending who you speak to, in this industry will say 15,000, other people will say 100,000 chemicals, whatever figure you want to take, less than 2% have been tested for safety. And many of these chemicals are something which come out of the leach from the materials, they're loosely bound. And also, as you mentioned in your note, they come out as leachates. They come out in the soil. They transmigrate to food systems and to the air. And you also mentioned incineration. When we mention incineration, one of the driving factors for incineration standards and cost has been the issue of heavy metals and dioxins, which are both released when you burn these metals. And of course, we have very strict standards for dioxins on paper, but they're really not followed to the extent because the cost of these machines become exorbitantly high. Toxicity is a particular kind of thing which is not so well understood because classically we look at toxicity as from what we call, a lethal dose 50 tests. That means 50% of the population of an organism dies because of toxic. That's what you consider toxicity. But what of the last 25 years of research has shown that we're looking at chronic toxicity, low level toxicity, which comes from chronic exposures. For example, in tobacco, but also looking at chemicals in baby feeding bottles. Then if these become waste, then this toxicity is passed on, and we have no great ways of measuring them. We have tried to control some of them in India, and because we're part of several international conventions, but all of them taking great amount of effort, such as lead in paints, pesticides, some additives like phthalates in baby products, mercury in thermometers, which Sashi will tell you constantly find them, broken thermometers in the waste stream, or azo dyes and benzidine dyes, which are in textile products. Now, all these becomes what we call waste. And when you deal with them as that, then they're all released in one way or the other. So these can't be destroyed by combustion, and recycling does not solve them. This myth of recycling is something I want to emphasize. There's a myth that you can recycle them safely without looking at the upstream issues of material safe, what kind of materials are being used, is actually being propagated for a long time. And the people who are most at risk from that are the recycling workers and the waste pickers because they have direct contact with them. It certainly is one of the sort of key issues in the circular economy because we have done studies to show, for example, if you recycle electronic plastics, which have a chemical called flame retardants, then when you recycle them into secondary products, which could be buckets or mugs, the flame retardants, which are cancerous, and you cannot recycle them, for example, in other countries like Europe, they are transmitted and they become loosely bound and they leach out in a sense. The norms for toxicity also give a false sense of security because the way toxicity standards are developed are actually quite in the realm of probabilistic exposure. So, though once they become normative, so if you say 90 ppm of lead in paint, and you will find plenty of paint cans and painted products in landfills, and you combust them as well. If you say 90 ppm is a safe level, then scientists will tell you, current science will tell you that there is no safe level. And lead is one of the major inhibitors of IQ in small children, and gets released in the air. So these are sort of shifting as knowledge shifts, there's shifting standards, but again, these do not really the norms, of course, define technology of control, environmental norms control the technology standards. And I've been on several of these national standard making committees, and that these also then become drivers to what becomes the notion of safety. So, what is the safety in the air of a certain kind of, for example, particulate matter? Is it PM 1.1? Is it PM 10? And these have been shifting around the time. And this is like there's a bubble which is very hard to escape. And we have now new issues like microplastics, which are now the latest study shows it's also in human blood. Of course, it's in water, soil, everywhere. And all this, there are studies to show all that. Microplastics is a wide term, but just to clump them together as one term. Then, for example, dust particles. So you're in a landfill, you're working, and they're dust, but these dusts are carriers of all kinds of toxic chemicals. And when you breathe them, because they are so fine, they become very fine carriers, and they impregnate your body deeply uh, 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 while you're in that environment. So impacts, we should also think of impacts which vary with vulnerability, both in terms of who gets most impacted. For example, air standards. If you look at air standards in our country or most places, there's a political economy of or of these air standards, because you have separation of air standards, for example, factory work floor, and for normal air, what we call normal air, but you don't have standards, for example, vulnerable women or children, or we don't have segregated standards for that. So the standard is uniform, but the impacts are not uniform. That's the point I'm trying to make. The impacts are very, very varied, and it's not really dealt with properly. And again, the people most at risk are people directly handling uh, or or the most vulnerable. Now, just to touch a bit on, there have been several over the last 20 years, several kind of international moves to stop the dumping of waste, and there is, of course, the Basel Convention, which was signed in 1989, and it's also implemented by the Supreme Court in India. But the Basel Convention deals with some issues around, example, what is waste in a sense, and this is important to see also, because there is whole idea of that waste is something which cannot be used, a negative good. But so if you bring it in the area of circular economy, or you have things like waste exchange, then it stops being waste. It's a big discussion I had with the environment ministry at some point, because for one particular kind of waste I want to lead you to is the idea of ship breaking. So at what point do ships which are meant for disposal internationally become waste? So when they come to Alang, what point are they declared waste? The Basel Convention only looks at the point of origin to discuss what is waste. But if it's declared waste mid-sea, then when it comes in, it is not waste at all. So the idea of what is waste is also a slippery slope. And, so does waste then, which becomes, recycled, or waste which becomes exchanged, does it stop being waste in a sense? Because it's an important definition, because it guides the way we look at legal policy and standards. So if you take it out of the definition of waste itself, then you are actually looking at the same materials, but in a completely different scenario, and they're not guided by the norms and standards which we look at waste from. So the various waste rules we have now, which are plenty, including plastic, e-waste, hazardous waste, municipal waste, etc., they will not just cease to apply to those materials which are not categorized as waste, even though the same thing. So of course, there's a lot of talk on circular economy right now, and there are waste has become the first low-hanging fruit, and within waste there are sort of new introductions, like something we worked on in 2011 called extended producer responsibility, where and that's now also gone partly to the plastic waste rules, partly to the lead acid based rules in different formats. And in those formats, what it's saying that there's a life cycle approach to materials, that if you're a company making say, electronic plastics, right, or electronic products, then your responsibility does not end at the point of sale. It extends beyond the point of disposal. That means you are responsible for collecting it and for recycling it or for putting it back into use. Now, EPR is a very, very important thing to think about because it's one of the foundational concepts of circular economy. And it's really hard to employ properly. So in this whole situation, as Shashi will tell you in much more detail, the the location of the waste picker becomes very, very sort of precarious. It's not very clear. So, for example, I'll give you an example. When we're working on electronic waste, uh, there is it's taken out of the realm of waste into specific waste streams. That means the waste picker technically should have no access to it. But what is happening is that companies which are licensed to recycle electronic waste subcontract it to the the classical the people informal sector without looking at any safety standards. So they become like aggregators because of their license to do that. So the point I'm making is that it's really a complicated issue, and just to conclude, I would say that what is, to my mind, really important in this issue is looking at materials in the life cycle and to have responsibilities and design changes and material safety throughout the life cycle of these materials. And this is a big job. It's been talked about a lot because what happens when you get waste across national boundaries because the regimes of legality do not apply. We import a lot of plastics in India because it is not all considered hazardous waste. So hazardous plastics are not allowed, but plastics are generally allowed. Then if they come from Europe, for example, where they have a certain norm of collection and regulation, and they come across borders and they're made by a international company, then at what point does the responsibility of material flows, global material flows apply? So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the aspect of material economy and waste value dialectics. So, thank you for shedding light on these topics. So, I'm not sure if you'll be available after 12:30.
I have to actually leave.
All right.
I have to take a flight. So I'm
Okay.
really sorry. If you have a couple of questions and if you are accommodating, then I can try and answer them. Otherwise, I'll be happy to
So, should
listen
we?
to it later on YouTube when you finish.
So, should we do a quick Q&A, right?
If there are any burning questions.
Yeah. If there are any questions for Ravi, maybe some of you can ask right now, and because he won't be available after 12:30. Are there any questions? Okay. So there is one question there. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, thanks for this very insightful talk. And actually, I was quite interested by your concept that you introduced about the life cycle of materials and how that is very important in dealing with all sorts of waste and toxicity crises. So I was wondering if in the Indian scenario there are any kind of rules or sort of legal steps to do anything about this. I suppose this has already
Yeah.
already started in the EU or something, right? So
Yeah, so I think it was, if I'm not wrong, in 2017 that the first Indian National Panel of Circular Economy was started the framework. And Niti Aayog has already, if you look at the website, you'll find some documents already there. They're looking at some sectors, for example, construction waste. You'll find this in Delhi, these construction waste facilities where you're supposed to only take them to those sites. electronic waste, automobile waste, which is really a complicated issue. Some of the issues of these taking the old automobiles back, and this is part of that policy. So there have been implemented. There's also been a talk of a national institute for looking at circular economy, primarily because the material issues of which waste is a part of are so complex and they deal so intersectorally across various sort of, if you want to say, ministries. But also they have many kinds of things in play, like financial mechanisms, design approaches, the formula, the investment in these recycling facilities. And what is most important for us is what happens to informal sectors in this whole issue. And I think that's the unspoken sort of thing that's not addressed, though the word informal sector was sort of included in the last municipal waste rules after a lot of Shashi will tell you, a lot of fights and arguments. But how well it's being implemented is really a question. So we are looking at materials in isolation to human interactions. This become what the international material policies start looking at. So they look at as if the human interaction is agnostic to the materials, which is not true at all, right? So that's why I said natural sciences and social sciences need to get together, which is not true in the way policy is formulated. And so if you can when you look at for the materials in this circular economy context, you don't consider what happens to livelihood. You don't consider what happens to impacts on health. And so there's a lot of work to be done on that.
Thank you, Ravi.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, and I know you
Thank
have
you.
travel. And also, what you spoke about Alang also makes me think, I'd never thought about it, but there's a whole coloniality to waste, right?
Of
Where
course.
ships are being sent to our ports, Alang port. Okay, thank you, Ravi. So
Thank you.
now,
Thank you.
uh,
Okay, bye.
now we have Professor Kaveri. She'll speak about Hilltown and informal waste workers. So over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Aparna, for inviting me. And it's a real pleasure to be here. And I'm also very happy to see that there's Nishant and other people from Ambedkar very active also in this area of waste. So I thought hard about what to present today. And so basically, Aparna gave a very generous introduction, but it also dates me to say that my research for my book is a quarter of a century ago. In fact, it's longer. So it is true that this book that was out now 15 years ago, but it really looked at the question of informal labor in the waste sector in great detail. And the field site was, the outskirts of Delhi. And in fact, so much has changed since when this work was undertaken. So it's called Of Poverty and Plastic, Scavenging and Scrap Trading Entrepreneurs. So to what sir was saying that we call them waste workers, here it's even the Schumpeterian sense of entrepreneurs in India's urban informal economy. So that was work I undertook then. And since then, I have continued to be interested in this area. I want to start by touching upon something that both Aparna and Ravi have, put forth as a background context, and that is, of course, India's liberalization and where we are as an economy today. So I will just say that even from an event like today's, we are going to leave a lot of paper cups, plastic bottles. We are also sitting in a venue, that one couldn't have conceived of in earlier years. And I recently took the Vande Bharat train, and I was just looking at the food. So all the coolers for chai and all is out of the window. In the one tray for the one person, there were hundreds is an exaggeration, but at least 10 types of multi-packaging waste that cannot be recycled. in a single, so, and today India is a fast-growing economy with aspirations to be a great power as well. And we are looking at a middle class and upper middle class whose consumption patterns are exactly following, the hyper-capitalist trajectory, I would say. So even going to airports, if you look at the packaging on, when they try to seal suitcases and all, so you just see, you look at what is emerging from this consumption. And in fact, going ahead, we are looking at a far bigger, kind of volumes, and also the composition, as Ravi was saying, the materiality of it, the complexity of it is going to be far, far, far greater. So the paper I'm going to talk about today, because one of the things of interest, as Aparna mentioned also, that in 2005, there was a policy change towards greater privatization. And I have always been interested, my primary interest, I'm trained as an economist, latterly more political economy interests. My main interest was about the labor question, the conditions of work and all of that. But two things I had wanted to see is, number one, that empirical work in this area is extremely difficult. And for those brave souls in this room who, Shashi ji is here, of course, and, the work carried out. But for those who are also teaching or doing other kinds of things and still trying to do some kind of primary research, it's not easy. And I was very interested in the question of where is the empirical work in what has happened since 2005, number one, on the ground. And the second question I had is really one that people pose to me, that Ravi has touched upon, Aparna also as well in a way, is that, okay, it's all very fine to talk about the interests of labor as, informal waste workers as part of the larger informal economy in India. And we saw during COVID what happened to informal waste workers in general, apart from waste as well. The exodus from the cities during COVID and the return and what is happening in terms of factory laws and all, we can see all that. But the question was that, we have all this waste that's coming out, and, what are your propositions for actually dealing with it? So this was one of the questions that very sympathetic academics posed to me during my professorship promotion interview 2 years ago. And it is worth considering, because as we are increasing the amount of waste that is produced, its complexity and all, this is something we can't get away from, right? So I think, so what I want to really present, and I'll go fast and then I can take any questions, is that I wanted to talk about some empirical work I did in a Himalayan medium town. And this, it's published work. This paper that I'm going to present is part of a series that my colleague Jabin Jacob and I, it's up on the Shiv Nada University website as part of the Himalaya Center work. And there was also a longer paper that's called The Environment as Disingenuous Trope, Tracing Waste Policy and Practice in a Medium Hill Town of the Himalayas, which came out with the Journal for Developing Societies in 2021. So here I want to just look at this question of, basically, to address two things. First, all the changes. So I'll just quickly set out that basically the management of municipal waste is a sphere of increasing interest in India, especially in urban areas due to the country's rapid growth, attendant leaps in consumption, and its changing composition of durables. Despite the role of the informal sector in collection and recycling being both extensively documented and well understood, standing in as it does for inadequate formal collection systems by bankrupt municipalities or absorbing uncollected waste, the main orientation of waste management policy in the country since 2005 has been in the opposite direction, with the state making every effort to formalize the sector via privatization. Aparna mentioned this. In constitutional terms, solid waste is a state subject. The 74th Constitutional Amendment Act of 92 heralded decentralization in urban governance. So this was the equivalent of the Panchayati Raj Act in rural areas, with municipal bodies at the local government level technically responsible for its management. The 1990s saw much environmental action litigation, and I have a paper out in a Rutledge volume now on law and environment that is coming out this year, because Aparna also mentioned PILs and so did Ravi, and that was the whole context of a lot of the rules being formulated in this area in the first place. raising objections to the inadequate formal collection and disposal of waste in unsanitary landfills by cash-strapped municipalities, and the sheer amounts of uncollected or dumped waste. So this resulted in the framing of the first municipal solid waste management and handling rules in 2000. And since 2005, however, a spate of ambitious central government programs in the sphere of urban governance have all implicitly pushed in the opposite direction of centralization. So though they talk about decentralization, if you actually look at what is going on, it's in quite the opposite direction. So the growing volume of research on municipal waste management since 2005, during this time of great reversal in the policy space, curiously neglects empirical studies of how formalization and decentralization by the state have played out on the ground. And I think there's a lot of work to be done here. Shashiji is here, and there are researchers here. Nishant, if your team, even Aparna, yours. I think there's a whole lot of work to be done, from different parts of India, because even that picture is not, uniform as we. So this paper seeks to address this lacuna, and specifically it examines two questions. First, have these changes resulted in better municipal waste management? Second, how are the formalization and decentralization read in the actual implementation? And these questions have great relevance in the policy sphere because they resonate with analogous changes in other social sectors and are also overarching in the framing of the problem. So of course, this whole event is organized by a public policy school, government and public policy. So it's of great interest there as well, sir. So here the main policy context since 2005, from the mid-1990s, activists and academics extensively documented the role of the informal collection and recycling sector in shoring up unsatisfactory waste management systems that prevailed in the country. While the policy documents appear to acknowledge their contribution, the actual trajectory in policy terms since 2005 has been formalization via privatization, as well as the application of uniform quick fix technological solutions, with the state's documents misappropriating and redefining well-received scientific rankings and terminology to legitimize such steps. Two striking examples are our waste-to-energy plants being pushed as a green technological solution, as well as integrated waste management being reconceived as end-to-end privatized management. And here I want to set out a call for research because there are active researchers here. It would be wonderful to have a study to look at the economics of these waste-to-energy plants. I have never come across a study looking at, what is the role of government subsidization? Are they economically effective on the ground? Have they failed on economic grounds as much as anything else? And have they been sort of backdoor kind of ways to appropriate government land as opposed to anything functional? And this, as again Ravi says, also requires both social scientists and hard science people to come together to conduct such a study, So this has been justified because in official understandings, the problem of municipal waste management has been reductively conceived of as a municipality's mere lack of finance, infrastructure, and governance capacity to be rectified by private sector investment, market-based financing, and actual participation in service delivery. This was the high-powered committee that was headed by the late Dr. Ishwar Ahluwalia, and they had a lot of deliberations on urban governance. So during this time, urban governance itself has taken a broader neoliberal turn. The central government's key programs in this sphere requiring cooperation from individual states, such as the Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission, Swachh Bharat Mission, Amrut Smart Cities Mission, all of these have signposted the entry and ever greater roles in various configurations for the private sector in urban service delivery. And in the management of municipal waste, this has largely taken the form of the municipal authority signing a concessionaire agreement with a private company to oversee its formal collection, transportation, treatment, and disposal. The most radical policy change that upended decentralized urban governance, as envisaged by the 74th Amendment, in favor of centralized and corporate governance, came with the Smart Cities Mission and its introduction of a special purpose vehicle deemed a limited company, in which states and municipalities have the status of promoters with a 50-50 equity holding. In general, Smart Cities Mission recommended smart solutions for better urban infrastructure and services, which in the sphere of waste management took the form of waste-to-energy plants, and also the promotion of smart meters and other new technological solutions. So now the study site I won't go into, but it's a medium hill town in the Himalayas. And I just want to put out that you're all aware of the 6-lane highways that are going up to our mountains. So this one is called Urban Ecologies. And, Sir's lived in Canada here, the protection. So if you look at, and I won't go into here, but it's very interesting that, what is defined as urban in the Himalayas, Rohit Negi's work at Ambedkar, fantastic work. That itself is very open to question, right? Because it's urban, or what is being classified as urban, and how are we dealing with all this? I'm not going into that. But also Barbara Harris's, I picked a medium town because a lot of our empirical work, looking at large cities and my own work in Delhi and everything, but I was interested in this base question in small, medium town, Himalayan setting. And there I'm just going to say that, I looked at, so there's a medium hill town defined by various, metrics. And there's an upper town and lower town, and the upper town is where it receives all the most of the waste because a lot of the tourism happens there. I've anonymized the place because, I felt after my book, I should have anonymized the location. I never thought it would have such legs, so then in this context, I'm just going to, So the key findings here, until the town came under centralized urban governance programs such as GNNURM, SPM and SCM, Swachh Bharat Mission, Smart Cities, its solid waste management was organized as follows. As Aparna mentioned, there were long-term municipal sweepers. All locals undertook sweeping and the collecting of unsegregated waste from large open barrel containers kept at various points by the municipal council. To tackle the waste generated and keep the surrounds clean, a refugee civil society organization additionally funded hired green workers and ran its own solid waste management collection system, complete with its own trucks, etc., in Upper Town, which contributed in a significant and sustained way over many years towards keeping the area clean. This was officially recognized and relied upon in the wards of Upper Town, so 3 out of 17. Insofar as from 2002 till 2016, the municipal council at the time assigned an annual contract with this refugee organization to supervise and oversee its own formal sweepers and the collection of waste, which, however, was still loss-making to the refugee organization. Like Delhi's informal but sophisticated waste recycling system, in this medium hill town context too, what could be reused or recycled from the unsegregated waste was separated out by the category of material by the sweepers and sold for additional earnings to the 1 or 2 informal waste dealers who further sold it along the value chains flowing into the plains. The difference being the unique topography, limiting the number of dealer shops, as well as the space for sweepers to collect the unsegregated waste in greater volume and sift through it in their free time and all this. And non-recyclable waste would be ferried and dumped in the unsanitary landfill a few kilometers from Lower Town. So that is what the picture was in terms of disposal. From 2015-16 itself, as the town came under the sway of the centralized urban governance programs of Swachh Bharat Mission and Smart Cities Mission, its municipal corporation immediately subcontracted solid waste management to a private company that bid for it and whose headquarters are located at a great distance in another state for a greater sum than was ever paid to the refugee organization. That company subcontracted it to the refugee organization for a year before the latter withdrew. The empirical details of how this privatization and formalization plays out in terms of relationships between the municipal corporation, the refugee organization, and the private company, with the perversely greater informalization, attrition, surveillance, and erosion of sweepers' rights are the subject of another paper. I never got around to it, but it's exactly as Aparna said, that now you have biometric attendance. They don't get paid if they don't show up, and there's all this going on. And that biometric attendance is going cross-state and cross-city. So there's all of that, but I didn't get around to publishing that part. But though we are talking about waste workers here, I'm going to suffice it to summarize the key findings as being that of informality constituting the core of India's formalized and privatized waste management sphere, as holds true of its urbanization and planning regime in general. So this, of course, I'm alluding to the work of Ananya Roy and others, right? So it is the idiom of informality that runs through the entire urban planning and implementation that is going on. Now, the main things proposed under Swachh Bharat Mission and smart cities was to do away with the larger open barrel containers and put smart dustbins fitted out with sensors and inbuilt compartments for segregated waste. Second, to achieve 100% door-to-door collection and waste segregation from the visibly low starting point. Third, to set up waste to biogas plants to generate electricity. Fourth, to build compost pits as a green solution for biodegradable waste. And fifth, to construct a sanitary landfill to absorb the waste that was disposed. 5 years into these new measures, the actual results achieved on each of these policies is abysmal. So I'm just going to, I think I have another 5-7 minutes. So rather than reading this out, I'm just going to set out, some. So these smart underground dustbins proved their unsuitability for the local topography and conditions fairly quickly. Burying them underground in a mountainous terrain did not prove easy. Once the sensor stopped working, which was early on, the sweepers would have to call the truck whenever the bins got full. Although within belt compartments for this segregated waste, households largely did not segregate the waste before disposing it in these bins. When emptying them with the use of special hydraulic trucks, the waste from all the compartments is upended simultaneously and mixed. The monsoon sees a flooding of these overflowing underground dustbins. And the centralization of urban governance with the state holding sway over the local government municipal corporation level also emerged strongly in the idea of these smart underground dustbins in the first place, as well as the decision of replacing old large open barrel containers. So this was the first technological solution. The door-to-door collection was basically introduced but was not in operation. It was in a few lower town areas. The proposed waste to biogas plants never had a chance of working due to the lower actual daily production of waste than what was put in the documents. The decentralized compost pits also did not work, and the mayor blamed the lack of human resources on the ground, both at the local government level and from the private subcontracted company. Indeed, the subcontraction of the solid waste management system to a private company under the centralized urban governance programs made little sense, according to the mayor, who set out how they had petitioned the state government many times for the municipal corporation to directly hire sweepers themselves, but to no avail. So this is also going to segue very nicely with Rahul, who's going to talk about state capacity and also the work of CPR and all, on the accountability initiative, like when we are talking about federalism and which layers of government. Finally, the non-implementation of avowed policies. The additional commissioner admitted to the construction of the proposed sanitary landfill being the biggest challenge, sharing that they have not been able to identify new land for it. The present municipal corporation dump site, technically falling in the forest area in flagrant violation of laws, continues to be a receptacle for the bulk of the daily disposed waste of the entire medium hill town. And this remains unchanged. So now I won't, so just to summarize, so there has been no development of it, remaining a mere plot of land on the hillside to which the municipal council has constructed an entry gate, but with no lights, no segregation centers or machinery apart from a covered shed, contaminating the stream below the hill and impacting the health of nearby communities. During the monsoon, the place becomes almost completely inaccessible, even to the handful of subcontracted company sweepers who otherwise try to keep a semblance of order amidst the daily waste dumped and its stench. So to summarize, the various recommendations for waste policy emerging from top-down viability studies commissioned under the Central Urban Governance Programs of Swachh Bharat Mission, Smart Cities Mission, either remain unimplemented in practice or have not yielded the results envisioned. Apart from the informality that is fundamentally constitutive of the sector's so-called formalization and privatization, as shown by this paper, the other major finding is the reinforcement of centralized urban governance in practice. If the 74th Constitutional Amendment remained notional insofar as the local government municipal level always had to do the bidding of the state and the central levels, then the for-profit consultants and non-local privatized players introduced by the central government's urban governance programs have only fortified that trend. It's no surprise then that far from being resolved and better, the waste management is worse than prior to these policy changes. Indeed, the common consensus among residents of the middle hill town is that elevation to a smart city status has yielded no results on the ground. For 1 month after being declared a smart city, Wi-Fi was released freely. That was one part. After that, I didn't see any improvement in the city, maybe in some larger cities, but in smaller cities like this one, we didn't see any changes. Now, I will just end that this time I went and I suddenly saw many changes. So this was now and 3-4 years later. So suddenly they have lifted all the compost pits from this upper town. They have completely done away with all the underground dustbins. They have proposed more workers on the ground. There is a truck with music that goes for collection morning and night. And this has improved things a lot because, you know, the hotels and all that were throwing out waste at night, now there's no such littering. So when I asked that what was the provocation that, you know, for all of this, I was told that there was a very good commissioner. Young commissioner, he came last year and he's gone now. So I will just leave you with the thought that, as Ananya Roy says, informalization. My old work talks so much about urban informal sector, and it is all going on, but informalization is actually the name of the game, even in terms of India's urbanization, planning, and all these things. It is as good or as bad as, you know, having somebody come in or not. The good news was that the workers' conditions got a bit improved. Their pay went up. But it is like, you know, as Aparna shared, the long-term full-time job of sweeping and all has all disappeared. It is now people coming from elsewhere. They are getting contractual work, and there are all these surveillance mechanisms in order for them to get their hardy, basically. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kaveri, for that insightful and thought-provoking talk and telling us about what are the challenges of medium hill town, especially given the climate and the topography, and how the larger promise of Swachh Bharat remains unfulfilled in our country. Okay, so next we have Rahul. Rahul will be speaking on state capacity and Swachh Sarvekshan Abhiyan. Yeah, so he'll be talking about state's response and attitude towards basically the implementation of solid waste management policies. Okay, over to you, Rahul, and
so they can put that up. I'll start. Hi, I'm Rahul. I'm a bit more disorganized, I guess, than my previous speaker. So I will be looking at my phone and going through various sort of thoughts back and forth. I work at the School of Public Policy at University College London right now. So in that sense, I feel close sort of affinity to the people in this room who are from the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. Thank you for having me. Before that, I worked for 5 years where I was leading at CPR, the Center for Policy Research, where I was leading with Mekhala Krishnamurthy, the work on state capacity. So I'm going to come at this waste question a little bit from that angle. I've done a lot of practice on waste before that. In fact, to sort of Kaveri's research call, I tried during my PhD a few years back to actually do a techno-economic analysis of waste to energy plants. The challenge is the data is private. These are private actors, ILNFS and all of that, and they're not going to release that data to you. And so it was very hard to do, but I did work on other stuff which I reflect on here. So let me just get into it. So I mean, thank you. You know what's happened to CPR, but I am a very pro-state person, and so I'll be speaking even regardless of how it has engaged with me. And so I'll be speaking in terms of trying to think about state capacity and improved state capacity, or they can use it for regulatory means or for managing waste. That's their choice. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 3 things, and the first 2 are very brief. They're more responses to the kinds of things that we've been hearing. Sort of Ravi alluded to the idea that this recycling conversation is complex. It's because we don't look at upstream as to what is actually being put into the materials in the first place. The other myth to me over the last few years that I've been working with the state actors is this wealth to waste. And I think it's actually a little dangerous. While it has its origins among sort of waste worker movements and sort of the idea that there is a community of people who can extract wealth from waste, I think it has become a norm that is a slightly more dangerous norm within the bureaucracy, right? And I'll explain why that is, right? So, I kind of, during my time at CPR and before, I've been training state civil service officers. We hear a lot about, the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy of Administration, Labasna, and IAS officers. We don't actually pay a lot of attention to the state civil services. And in many small and medium towns, it's actually those officers who are responsible for waste. You see, municipal commissioners who are IAS are only for large towns mostly. But when you get into the smaller towns, especially rural to urban transition towns, the people who become responsible for councils, for municipalities, are typically very senior state civil service officers. And so I'll speak a little bit more about them. But some of this, why I call it a myth, is because I think in some ways we have taken sort of within the bureaucracy, I think this has distracted us from the core work of the disposal of waste. I think what it has done, and anytime I talk to sort of bureaucrats from these towns, they say, no, we have to generate wealth from waste. What is this wealth from waste? So much of waste is actually just supposed to be disposed and disposed correctly. And that to me is the core public health function of the government. So I think for me, this is problematic for two reasons, right? One is that I think it has distracted government from its core function of just understanding how to get waste that is bad for people from point A to point B and prevent public health hazards. We are a country with a high amount of diarrhea in children. The correlation between that and the way that we manage our liquid and solid waste is quite high. And instead, regardless of the history and the positive history that waste to wealth has, I think so much of the way that it's being used today is actually for the government to shift out of the role that it is playing, right? To think that once you attach this idea of financial viability and wealth, I don't think waste fundamentally, it should cost us. It should cost us to get rid of our waste. If we start thinking about generating wealth from waste, it's great. Some things can generate a little bit of wealth, but it does distract from the core public health function. Governments are there to create public goods. Those public goods are there because we as individual consumers are not going to, in a collective sense, create that public good, sort of core public policy 101, right? And therefore, this externality that is generated, the payment needs to come from somewhere. And I think we have forgotten that core function of what waste is actually about, that it is dangerous most of the time, and it needs to be gotten rid of. And instead I've gotten quite distracted by this wealth to waste thing. And this is also, I think, to kind of speak to what the previous speakers were talking about, led to us then depending far too much on outsourced solutions for waste management, right? Which is mostly coming in the form of waste to energy, incineration, outsourcing of the work of collection and segregation itself. And then, of course, all the challenges that waste workers face because of that is something that the previous speakers have spoken about. Because you give it to these contractors aren't really going to take care in many cases of the people that they employ. So I just want to throw this out there. It might be contentious. You can disagree with it. But to me, it feels like a challenge and something that, that comes up again and again in terms of the norm that has creeped into the way that the bureaucracy thinks about waste. We don't do the fundamentals, we jump to smart bins. We don't do the fundamentals, we try to generate wealth from waste, right? We have to, first of all, know how to dispose waste. And I think once we do that, then we can do other things. So I'll quickly reflect a little bit on this question. I think that where one of the biggest gaps is in our understanding of transition governance, that is rural to urban, right? As we know that the urban has a certain set of programs and schemes that have poured in a lot of money into the urban over the last decade. Before that, when the urban was very popular with the JNNURM and all of that. The rural has a very different function, right? The rural is where welfare happens, the urban is where growth happens, right? And so when transition happens from rural to urban, the fundamental nature of the state's fiscal relationship with that area changes. And when that happens, you have a move away from people getting money for various schemes, Narega, etc., and then money going into infrastructure. But the transition bureaucracy that's able to manage this often isn't in place. It's very hard to, and if you get into the weeds, right, randomly some selection of panchayat officials happens, a kind of urban council is created, and that has no capacity and no understanding of the urban waste management problem or many of the other urban problems. Right? That's one. So one is this challenge of the rural to urban transition towns, and this is happening quite rapidly, as you know. The second challenge is with who are the officers who are put into place in many of these places. Like I said earlier, it's not your heavily trained, exposed IS officers who have disproportionate power compared to state civil service officers who can come in and then pass around orders and then improve things suddenly. Right? We've seen this in Indore. Indore has had a series of important IS officers, powerful IS officers placed in the corporation. That's why things happen. It doesn't happen on its own. And what typically happens in small town bureaucracies, in councils and municipalities, is that you have very senior state civil service officers. So, for example, I was working in Kohima for some time on their waste management plan, and the commissioner or I don't think they're called the commissioner. Anyway, the council head, because commissioner is term used for corporations, is a sort of NCS or Nagaland civil service officer who is close to retirement. There isn't much incentive to do any work at that point of time. Plus, there is always the excuse of there is no money, right? And so one part of the problem is actually looking at the incentives of our officers. You put young IS officers in these situations, they're going to do, actually waste management has made many IS officers, young IS officers' careers in the last few years. It's a very important subject for this government, and it is a good thing to be able to show, fast and rapid change, and if you just apply yourself a little bit, right? But that's not the case for our smaller towns. And so I think my sort of appeal just is that if people are working on these questions, there is lacks of these other towns where transitions are happening and where new bureaucrats are coming in who do not actually understand anything about urban metabolism or the way that urban planning happens or how to manage waste, most importantly. Okay, I hope I'm not talking too quickly, but I'm going to take I thought I had too much to say, so I was talking quickly, but I don't. But I'll take a little bit more time now and talk a bit about my research. So, in some sense, what I'm saying here is that there is a norms problem, right? The first point is around the kinds of norms that have become embedded in the bureaucracy. In the second case, I'm saying there's an incentives problem, right? Because of the nature and the age of bureaucrats that are typically manning these municipalities. The third thing I'm going to say is we've tried to solve the incentives problem, right? And that one way that has been done is with the Swachh Sarvekshan. The Swachh Sarvekshan, all of you, I guess, know, is a nationwide survey and ranking program of cities and how they do on waste. Now, I have a upcoming publication which I'll speak about, and then some previous work also which I'll just highlight here. This is me now being a researcher. So there might be a regression table here. Please, just let me know if you need help with that. Okay, so one of the interesting things, I'm sorry, this is coming below, so I don't know if anyone can see it. So I've looked at the data from 2016 to 2022, right? So 5 years of data of the Swachh Sarvekshan, and I don't pay too much attention to the numbers. It's complex, just a lot of data there. But the Swachh Sarvekshan has changed its methodology over time, right? The way that it scores and ranks cities is based on collection of some data, and that data is collected in primarily two different ways. One is the city self-report. Okay, so I'll tell you how much I deserve. Okay, and the other is this third-party person comes in and then assesses you, right? And then tells the city exactly how many marks you should get. What has happened over time is that you started with a service level progress, which is the city's own reporting. City's own service level progress is where the city reports its own data, right? Which started at about 50% of the total score. Over the years, it has come down to 25%. I haven't looked at data after that because it's too difficult to now download it. They make it harder and harder each year to download it. So in these years, it was all available on a single sheet. Now I have to go to each city and then open 3 tabs, and then I can see the data, and then I have to copy paste it. Sorry, yes.
Sorry, what does
So if, let's say a city has 100 points that it has to score on the Swachh Sarvekshan, and then it gets a rank. So in 2016, 50 points out of that were coming from data that the city has to report. And the other 50% were coming from data, points were coming from the scores that were given by an external third-party examiner. That has shifted. Over time, now the city's own rating of itself is 25%. Independent observation, however independent that is. Citizen feedback, which is a totally fairly nonsensical thing. It's like, do you like some click yes, I like waste or whatever, I don't know. And certification are where 75% of the score weightage is coming from, right? So I had done some work earlier to say, is this a sensible system? Right? A system that is not stable over time, a metrics system that is not stable. You can say government has learned that self-reporting is bad because they're gaming the system, right? But I mean, that's not not exactly something that should have occurred to them so many years later. But actually, it's not just these big score. Even within this, there are score components that are constantly changing. How much is the one amount given for disposal? How much is given for collection, segregation, etc. So this is an old paper where I had re-weighted, and I'll say this slowly. But for each year, I had re-weighted the score based on what the scoring parameters would have been for the previous year, right? Which is that, what would my score be if I'm city A, if I was still being judged by the previous year's metrics? Now, when you do that, what you find at its worst, and this is the mean, right? In 2018, the average difference in scores is around 8 points, which is many, many ranks. Okay, and this is only one example. I know in averages it looks small, but out of 100, 8 points doesn't seem like a lot. But there are cities like Mysore which go from, rank 80 to rank 20. Right, that's what happens. So the distribution of the data with 8 in the middle means that actually there's a lot of ranking mismatch happening. So one of the things that I had kind of shown in this piece was the idea that these ranks are actually very unstable and they don't tell you much about performance, right? Because they change so easily. This is point number one. But my further research on this now, which is going on now, is to actually say this target shifting happens. It's called target shifting, right? When you change the... So it happens because sometimes you find out there's better knowledge out there. Okay, so I put a new metric. Other times, and most commonly, you want to hide things. This we've done very often in this country, in every country in the world, right? So it's not particularly our problem. China keeps hiding its indicators, right? The US does it actually much more. And this is very common with sexual harassment, right? If you don't have any numbers reported, there is no sexual harassment, right? That's or you devise new and better methods, right? Now, what this is seen as most commonly, however, right? Even if you might do it from any of these perspectives, you might do it because you positively learned something new. Unfortunately, what it actually does, it actually drives people, right, to look at these targets and then shift their behavior accordingly, right? And usually that gaming behavior is gaming behavior, and I'll show you why in this case it's gaming particularly, right? We've recently read of all of these US universities, top ones, dropping out of rankings, right? So the world university ranking system, Columbia, Harvard, all of them have dropped out of it, right? They don't find it a useful metric for measuring their performance. Yet we are using the same system because we believe that competition is good. Competition among who? Among deeply unequal candidates, right? We have competition between Indore, which is flush with funds, and Kohima, which has zero money. So is competition useful when you do it between deeply unequal candidates? I leave that as an open question. Now, so why did we shift towards more external assessment over time, right? One reason you could shift towards more external assessment is because the government that is doing the assessment wants control. These marks are with me. I can control them. The other reason is that they're trying to reduce the burden of self-reporting on cities because they're being nice. So I don't want to assume bad things. The third is that they're trying to limit gaming by cities because the more amount of scores the cities have in their hands, they can tweak them around, right? So let's assume all of this and actually look at what happens. Right? So this is just the data. I somehow managed to scrape all this data and then a bunch of interviews to understand what the actual selection mechanism is on the ground. And then, also got revenue data, and everyone who works for cities knows this is impossible to get. Okay. Now, here is what is known in sort of the econ world as an identification strategy. I won't get into that in too much detail because the audience is diverse. But here's the simple thing. You change the score, right? And you measure and release a ranking every year. Do we expect that the new score that the city has do you think that's a result of better implementation, or do you think it's simply a result of tinkering around with the scores, right? That's the fork that we are at, right? Now, imagine that the score plan is announced for the year, and by the fourth quarter, the results are declared. Let's look at a couple of quotes. You know how implementation happens. Implementation is always slow. Actually, it is not very feasible to respond in such a time frame. Right? For example, the SWM project took 2 to 3 years to get approved. These are various interviews, right? But by then people have changed and the priorities have also changed. We have to submit a monthly MIS, right? Collecting data from all the departments. Once you see the portal, you will understand the kind of data that's being captured and how difficult it is for a city who's unable to hire a consultant. My point being, the amount of time it takes to put the data together over a 1 year timeline is heavily mismatched against the actual time it takes to implement change. So what is the change in scores coming from? It cannot be coming from new implementation. It has to be coming from some sort of tinkering with the scoring mechanism. I'm sorry if this is too complicated, happy to speak about it again. But just for the sake of it, just saying that for actual change, this timeline should be actually all of these, right? Should be 3 years, but it's every year. Okay, so what do I see? Now those who are the qualitative world, I'm mixed, so I can do both, but if this is oppressing anyone, please tell me. Just look at this first row. What I basically managed to show in this is that cities that are most negatively impacted by the change in the metrics, right? We go back to that first slide, where every year the percentage changes. Cities that are most negatively impacted by the change in metrics are more likely to over-report their score against the third-party evaluation by 10 points. Should I repeat that? Yes. Don't look at any of this. Okay. The first highly significant result is it's telling you that when you change the scores metrics every year, right? 1 year it's 75%, 1 year it's 25%. Cities are going to respond. They're going to say, oh, I want last year's score, right? Cities that are most negatively impacted by the change in the score. So if last year I got 100, this year I'm getting an 80. But if last year's metric was used, I would have got 100. That means I have a minus 20 just because the score changed, the metric changed. So then I compared that and ran sort of a regression to understand how would that change their reporting behavior, which is what is the difference between their self-reported score and the externally observed score. And you find a 10-point difference out of 100. That's a pretty significant example of gaming behavior, right? Why? Because we go back to this, implementation does not change. What changes in what you have time for. Suddenly, if you want the metric to measure whether the landfill has been cleared, you're not going to do it in 1 year. So something else is happening. Do I have a problem? I'm not going to talk marginal effects, but let me stop here. Let's read you a few more quotes and then I'll stop. Okay, so do I blame the cities? No, I'm not blaming the cities. Do I think that this is a good way to incentivize and motivate cities to do waste management? I really don't think so. And I don't think so for two reasons. One is, of course, this result, which shows that cities are very sensitive to changes in the ranking system. And this where I just use that oddity in our ranking system to show this, right? Because cities will never self-report that they were gamed. So I have to find a way to show that they gamed. I don't blame the cities because these two quotes will kind of tell you a little bit about that. When we are asked for data from our corporation, it is very difficult to produce data. We are asked to enter data within these timelines, and there are always delays since the corporation does not have the data or the people to collect and manage data properly. You see, the people in the corporation are very busy already. Their hands are full. I felt that data was entered incorrectly because the city did not have it in the format that the parameters were developed for. This is one city that's telling me that, bhai, chhod do mujhe. Because engineer 3, whose job is also to go and inspect every lab, is coming after that work and then try to enter some data into a portal that needs it monthly in the MIS by the 5th. Okay, another quote. This is from a city you can guess. We are sitting in a top ranked city. From our perspective, we feel motivated. We are 6th now, and last year we were 8th. But when our colleagues see that their city is constantly at the bottom, they don't feel motivated. If you see who's active in terms of these cities and state, it's the same set of who's active in Swachh Sarvekshan. It is the same set of cities every year. Cities in 3 names redacted for confidentiality don't really participate in Swachh Sarvekshan. Those cities never ranked at the top and they don't feel motivated at all. And sort of one more quote. If you are always at the bottom, whatever you do is not being recognized. Let the rankings go to hell. Okay, this person was very angry. Also from Kerala. Some cities have said that they will not participate in these rankings. There's probably a huge demotivational cost. When you are at the bottom, there are lots of constraints as to why you cannot obtain a good rank. Right? And finally, who are the officials filling these data? They're the draftsmen or the lowermost clerks. They probably fudge the data. They don't have the data, and the person filling it does not know the objective. So he does not understand why he's filling the data. It's not their responsibility, and they are not equipped to handle these kind of data. They are forcing them to participate in the rankings. So I'll stop here with just a general observation that the real problem is just coming back to the fact that there is something to dispose. We have moved away from that to try to create wealth. We have moved away from that to try and incentivize through competition in an unequal, heavily skewed classroom, right? All our education institutions today are like sabko equal karo, matlab, they're going the other direction, right? You raise the poorer students and then you support the ones who are very smart. But here, I think this is the approach, and I hope that actually some of this, when it is published, the IO4 is watching this. Of course, I'll be in more trouble. But until then, it would be great if people could continue to sort of highlight the actual problem on the ground, which is of waste workers and getting implementation done properly. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rahul, for that intriguing discussion and showing us a very different side of Swachh Bharat. And like we talk about the political economy and talk about greenwashing, you've showed us data washing and how the whole projection of Swachh Bharat is working. Okay, so now we have Shashi Bhushan Pandit presenting his work, and Shashi ji will speak about informal workers and the localized solutions that he's been working on for over last 15 years. So Shashi ji. आपकी में slide है वैसे.
सभी को नमस्कार। और मैं अंतिम वक्ता हूँ, तो सब लोगों को काफ़ी सुन चुके हैं बातें, तो काफ़ी बातें आ गई हैं। और मैं चूँकि अंतिम वक्ता हूँ और अंतिम आदमी के लिए भी मैं काम करता हूँ, क्योंकि वेस्ट वर्कर को सबसे लास्ट में माना जाता है। तो मुझे बस 2-3 अपील मुझे है, मैं कहने आया हूँ। मैं तो बात तो चूँकि आप लोग से ज़्यादा बढ़िया कोई नहीं कर सकता है। हम लोग, मैं पर्सनली जो है हमेशा जा कर के लोगों से अपील करता हूँ। इसलिए अपील करता हूँ कि मैं मानता हूँ कि यदि हम लड़ाई लड़ रहे हैं, उस लड़ाई में हम अपने और नंबर्स को बढ़ाएं, और मैं इसी के खोज में रहता हूँ। और मैं हर जगह यही अपील करता हूँ। अपर्णा जी भी जब मेरे पास आई कि हमको मिलना है लोगों से, तो मेरे को बहुत आशा जगी मेरे मन में कि हाँ, ऐसे लोग, राहुल भाई के साथ भी मैंने काम किया है जब ये PhD कर रहे थे। तो मैं सभी लोगों को मैं बहुत वेलकम करता हूँ, और मुझे बहुत उत्साह बनता है मेरे मन में कि अब हमारा कुछ काम आगे बढ़ रहा है। और आज भी मैं इसी उम्मीद में आया हूँ कि आप लोगों के सामने मैं बात रखूँगा तो हमारे को ताकत मिलेगा। और वैसे लोगों की बात जिनके बारे में हम लोग दूर से ही समझते हैं, नज़दीक से नहीं देख पाते हैं, और वो बहुत बड़ी मतलब इम्पोर्टेंट जो है बात है। वो इम्पोर्टेंट माने हम इसलिए मानते हैं, इसे मानते हैं कि हमारे शहरों में 2 तरह के लोग आ रहे हैं। एक तो कोई जो लोग आ रहे हैं वो अपने बेटरमेंट के लिए आ रहे हैं पलायन होकर के गाँवों से। एक आ रहे हैं कि जो जीविका जीने के लिए आ रहे हैं। और वेस्ट स्पीकर वही लोग हैं जो लोग अपने गाँवों से पलायन होकर के जीविका जीने के तलाश में वो लोग शहर में आ रहे हैं। और वैसे लोग जिनके पास में कुछ भी नहीं है, कोई जुगाड़ हो तो कोई फैक्ट्री में काम लग जाएगा, कोई चौकीदारी में लगा लेगा, लेकिन जिनके पास कोई जुगाड़ नहीं है वो लोग बोरा उठाते हैं और शुरू कर देते हैं अपने जीवन की। जिनके पास कुछ भी स्कोप नहीं होता है, होप नहीं होता है जीवन जीने के लिए, तो उनके पास एक होप बनता है कि कचरा से यदि हम जीवन को शुरू करेंगे, कचरा शुरू करेंगे तो एंड ऑफ द डे शाम तक कुछ ना कुछ हम पा लेंगे। तो उनकी कोई बात नहीं सुनता है। तो आप कानून भी यदि हमारा देखेंगे तो कानून भी यही कहता है कि बहुत अच्छा काम कर रहे हैं, लेकिन आप चाहें तो उनको शामिल करें, चाहें तो ना करें, वो आपके ऊपर निर्भर करता है, आप तय करें। और बहुत सारे लोगों के पास अपने अपने एक्सपीरियंस है। बहुत राहुल भाई ने कहा कि बहुत दबंग जो है IAS अधिकारी को जो है भेजा जाता है इंदौर में, इसलिए संभव हो पाया। मैं कह रहा हूँ कि सरकारी गुंडे को भेज करके और वहाँ पे इम्प्लीमेंट कराया गया और वेस्ट वर्कर को शहर से तड़ी पार कराया गया। इंदौर की ये सच्चाई है। आज वेस्ट स्पीकर को इंदौर शहर में एंट्री बैन है, और तब ये कहा गया कि शहर जो है स्वच्छ है। और स्वच्छ जो है इंदौर के यदि दृष्टिकोण से हम देखें तो लगातार चौथे बार जो है वो नंबर 1 गेन किया है। क्या वो रैंकिंग के बारे में मुझे बहुत ज़्यादा रैंकिंग के बारे में मुझे ज़्यादा नहीं कहना है, वो नीचे जाइए, 3rd 1। इसके बाद हाँ, लेकिन इसमें 2 था, एक ही आ रहा है। हाँ, लेकिन इसमें 2 था, एक ही आ रहा है। हाँ ठीक है, परफेक्ट। नहीं, मुझे इतना ही बोलना है। तो ताड़ी पार करके लोगों को, और आप वो बनाए हैं उसको, और वो भी एक हिस्सा को बनाया आपने। ऐसा नहीं कि पूरे इंदौर जो है स्वच्छता के रैंकिंग के वो उसमें है। जो एक एरिया को उन्होंने डेवलप किया जिसमें आपको इस तरीके के जो एक्टिविटी है जो रियली में हो रहा है हर जगह, उसको आपने बैन किया। और बैन करके क्या किया? बैन करके उन्होंने जो किया वहाँ पे, वो ये किया कि एक नैपरा ग्रुप को, एक कंपनी को 4 दीवारी में वेस्ट को बर्न करने के परमिशन दिया। यही किया उन्होंने। जो इंदौर के जो लैंडफिल है, उस लैंडफिल के गेट पे नैपरा कंपनी को उन्होंने कांटेक्ट दिया और कहा कि आप यहाँ पे सब कुछ कर सकते हैं जो चाहते हैं, कुछ भी आपको लिए मनाही नहीं है, लेकिन वो 4 दीवारी के अंदर में करेंगे। यदि 4 दीवारी के बाहर होगा लोग लाइवलीहुड के लिए करेंगे तो वो गलत है, लेकिन चारदीवारी के अंदर में जो करेंगे वो सब कुछ मान्य है ना। तो इसलिए मैं सॉरी ये कहाँ गया दूसरा वाला, इधर बढ़ाइए, चलता है अच्छा इससे, हाँ ठीक है। तो मैं बस एक स्लाइड आपके सामने रखना चाहता हूँ। 2 सिस्टम चल रहा है इस देश में, 2 सिस्टम है, और एक सिस्टम जो चल रहा है अभी वो ये है कि 80% कचरे को लैंडफिलिंग किया जा रहा है, लैंडफिल में ले जाया जा रहा है। और दूसरा सिस्टम है कि आप 80% को उपयोग कर सकते हो। और यही जो है MSW रूल कहता है कि जो 80% जो जा रहा था लैंडफिल में, अब उसको रोक करके 80% को इस्तेमाल करना है। और आप सब लोग जानते हैं कि एक बड़ा सोर्स है ये लाइवलीहुड को, चूँकि MSW जो रूल है 2016 का, उसने नए एक शब्द का उपयोग किया उसमें कानून में, जिसका नाम दिया MRF, मटेरियल रिकवरी फैसिलिटी। तो मटेरियल रिकवरी फैसिलिटी से मतलब ही हो गया कि वेस्ट को जो है, अब कानून जो है वेस्ट नहीं मान रहा है, वेस्ट को एक रिसोर्स मान रहा है, और रिसोर्स की रिकवरी की बात कहा है कानून ने, जो कि आज वो नहीं हो रहा है। कानून के लागू हुए 7 साल 8 साल हो गए, स्वच्छ भारत मिशन का भी लागू हुए जो है अब ये दूसरा टेन्योर पूरा हो रहा है, और लोग ये कह रहे हैं कि भाई एक तरफ जहाँ लिखा है स्वच्छ, उधर तो स्वच्छ है, उधर जो भारत लिखा हुआ है उधर वो स्वच्छ नहीं है। जो स्वच्छ भारत मिशन का जो लोगो है उसमें दोनों चश्मे के पीछे जो बीच में लिखा हुआ है, एक तरफ स्वच्छ एक तरफ भारत, तो ये कह रहे हैं लोग कि भाई जिधर स्वच्छ लिखा हुआ उधर तो स्वच्छ है, लेकिन जिधर नहीं लिखा है उधर नहीं है। तो ये सच्चाई है कि 2 दयम के सिस्टम में हम लोग चल रहे हैं, और उसको इम्प्लीमेंट किया जा रहा है उसी को। तो इसीलिए ये जो तकनीक है, सिस्टम है कि आपको 80% वेस्ट को एक जगह ले जा करके डंप किया जा रहा है। और दिल्ली में 3 नहीं, दिल्ली में तो 4 अब लैंडफिल हो गया है। इंसिनरेटर वगैरह के तो नंबर बढ़ गए हैं, लेकिन लैंडफिल फिजिकली 4 है। बावाना में जो साइंटिफिक लैंडफिल जो हिंदुस्तान का पहला बना है, वो भी एक लैंडफिल ही है। बाकी भी प्रोसेस है, लेकिन वो लैंडफिल भी है वहाँ पे। और मैं फिजिकली जाके देखा हूँ कि लैंडफिल जो है वो बना है वहाँ पे। मुझे लगता है कि 20 एकड़ से कम में नहीं होगा, ज़्यादा ही में ही होगा वो जगह। जब कंस्ट्रक्शन हो रहा था तभी मैं गया था स्टार्टिंग में, बाकी तो समय में तो बाकी दिनों में तो वो बैन हो गया ना, उसमें एंट्री ही मना है, क्योंकि कंपनी को वो दिया गया है काम, तो कंपनी अलाउ नहीं करती लोगों को जाने के लिए। तो मैं बस इतना ही कहना चाहता हूँ कि देखिए, पिछले दिनों जो है दिल्ली की तो इतनी पुरानी सरकार जो है चली गई इस कूड़े के मुद्दे पे हैं। आने वाले समय में और भी बड़ा ये मुद्दा बनेगा। और मैं तो बस अपील करने आया हूँ कि देखिए, जो लोग जो गांवों से पलायन होकर के आए हैं, उनके ये लाइवलीहुड का सोर्स है, जीविका का साधन है, और उसी को ये लोग बदलना चाहते हैं, लाना चाहते हैं यहाँ पर कि 80% को हम ले जाएंगे डंप करने के लिए। और डंप करने के बाद में उसकी क्वालिटी ख़त्म हो जाती है, उसमें कोई भी मतलब कहिए कि एक तरीके से उसका दाम में जो है कहिए तो वैल्यू जो है उसका ख़त्म हो जाता है। और ख़ासतौर पे जो 50% जो कंपोस्ट वाला वेस्ट है, जिससे आप एनर्जी बना सकते हैं, वो तो एकदम ही ख़त्म हो जाता है, वो तो रह ही नहीं जाता है। तो इसीलिए मैं तो यही निवेदन करने आया हूँ, आप लोगों से विनती करने आया हूँ कि बिना किसी हार्म्स के इस मेथड से, कानून सम्मत तरीका है से कचरा के जो समस्या है, प्रॉब्लम्स है, इकोलॉजी की जो समस्या हो रही है शहर में, हीट की जो समस्या हो रही है, उसमें लोग कह रहे हैं कि कूड़ा भी उसका कारक है क्योंकि वहाँ आग लगा रहता है रेगुलर। तो उससे निजात पाने में एक अहम भूमिका जो है ये निभाया जा सकता है, हो सकता है। और ये हम नहीं कह रहे हैं, सिर्फ ये कानून ने ये बात कहा है। रवि सर ने बोला कि कानून के जब 2016 का कानून बन रहा था, मुझे याद है कि उस समय प्रकाश जावड़ेकर मिनिस्टर थे, इन्वायरमेंट मिनिस्टर, और हम लोग उनके लिए, उनसे मिलने के लिए कितने पापड़ बेले होंगे हम लोग जानते हैं। और इवन हम लोग बाबा आढ़ो को जो है पुणे से लेके आए, और 7 दिन तक बाबा आढ़ो यहाँ बैठे रहे। लास्ट दिन मिले हम लोगों को उनके घर पे, और हम लोगों ने यही कहा कि जब तक हमारी बात आप नहीं मेंशन करिएगा इस कानून में, तब तक हम लोग जाएंगे नहीं। अब बाबा आढाव को हम लोग ला दिए हैं। तो प्रकाश जावड़ेकर उस समय उनको लगा कि नहीं, क्योंकि बाबा आढाव थे वहाँ पे, क्योंकि वो पुणे से आते हैं और पुणे के ही बाबा आढाव हैं, एक बहुत सीनियर लेबर लीडर रहे हैं, तो उनकी बात को उठाना मुश्किल था। तो फिर वो हमारे एक साथी को उन्होंने ड्राफ्टिंग कमेटी में शामिल किया उस कानून में, और वो ड्राफ्टिंग में आपको देखिएगा कि उसका रिफ्लेक्शन आता है, लेबर के वेस्ट वर्कर की बात आती है। लेकिन प्रॉब्लम यही है कि ये रूल है, और रूल के जो गैप्स है, जो कानून के लोग हैं वो जानते हैं कि रूल जो है ई फॉरवर्ड के साथ चलता है कि आप चाहें तो करें, नहीं चाहें तो मत करें। इसीलिए हम लोग जो है ये निवेदन आप लोगों से भी करेंगे, और ये कहेंगे कि इस पे ऊपर हम लोगों को आपको आगे बात करनी चाहिए कि एक्ट बनना चाहिए इसको लेकर के। एक्ट नहीं होने के वजह से बहुत मुश्किल हो रहा है, क्योंकि जो एक्ट नहीं है तो मैंडेटरी नहीं है कि आप उसको फॉलो करेंगे। तो देखिएगा कि दिल्ली के जो बायलॉज बने, क्योंकि रूल के अगेंस्ट में आपको बाई रूल बनाना था हर यूएलबी को, जो लोग इम्प्लीमेंट करने वाले थे। बाई रूल को आप पढ़िए तो हाई कोर्ट के इंटरवेंशन से वो बाई रूल बने, और उस बाई रूल को आप कह सकते हैं कि सिर्फ टिफिन फी कलेक्शन करने की जो है एक मैनुअल है और कुछ नहीं है, जबकि वो एक्शन प्लान होना चाहिए था, प्रॉपर एक्शन प्लान होना चाहिए था। किसको किसको हम पार्टी बनाएंगे, किसके थ्रू ये काम को करेंगे, कुछ भी नहीं है उसमें। 40 पेज का 30 पेज का जो डॉक्यूमेंट है वो भी वो खुद नहीं बनाया है यहाँ के नगर पालिका ने, हाई कोर्ट ने एक कमेटी कंस्टिट्यूट की, उसके बाद वो डेवलप हुआ, और उसमें कुछ भी नहीं है। तो प्रॉब्लम ये भी है कि जो लोग ऐसे लोग कानून में बनाने में चल जा रहे हैं, शामिल हो रहे हैं, चाहे आ जा रहे हैं, जिनको अंदाजा ही नहीं कि क्या होना चाहिए था। तो इसीलिए मैं ये निवेदन करना चाहता हूँ आप लोगों से कि हम लोग अपर्णा जी, कावेरी जी, राहुल जी, सब लोग हम लोग कभी ना कभी मिलते रहते हैं मुद्दों पे। तो मैं ये चाहता हूँ कि हम लोग जो है एक कंप्रिहेंसिव जो है एक्ट की मांग हम लोगों को करनी चाहिए, और जब तक एक्ट में चीज़ें नहीं आएंगी तो ये अपने मनमानी से चलता रहेगा। सब लोग जान रहा है कि बहुत अच्छा रोल है, सब लोग बोलता है वेस्ट स्पीकर का बहुत बढ़िया कंट्रीब्यूशन है, सपोर्ट है, लेकिन वो इम्प्लीमेंट नहीं होता है। और पिछले 20 साल से 15 साल से हम लोग यही सुनते आ रहे हैं कि बहुत अच्छा है, बहुत अच्छा है, सब अच्छा है, लेकिन सब अच्छा है और कुछ भी अच्छा नहीं है। हम रोज जो है लात जूता खा रहे हैं। हमारा पूरा सोसाइटी जो है रोज जो है सीमा पे जो है धकेला जाता रहा है, और सब लगभग जो है सीमा से बाहर हम होते जा रहे हैं अब। कल को हम वेस्ट से भी 30% लोग बाहर हो चुके हैं, जो कंपनी और वर्कर्स के बीच में बहुत बड़ा वो संघर्ष चल रहा है। वो मुश्किल ये हो रहा है कि वो अपने साधन से काम कर रहा है, और कंपनी वाले जो है मोटर साधन से काम कर रहे हैं। तो कूड़े को कौन पहले पिक करेगा, इसको लेकर के स्ट्रगल चलना शुरू हुआ है। कल को मारपीट में बदल जाएगा, क्योंकि वो कहेगा कि हम लाइसेंसधारी आदमी हैं। मैं याद है मुझे कि हम एनडीएमसी में जब हम लोग काम कर रहे थे, बात कर रहे थे, तो यही हमको रम की कंपनी के लोग कह रहे थे कि भाई हम तो लाइसेंसधारी हैं, हमको तो लाइसेंस मिला हुआ, हम परमिशन मिला हुआ है। तो हमने कहा कि नहीं, आपको परमिशन इसके लिए नहीं मिला हुआ है, आपसे लड़ना पड़ेगा हमको। और फिर हम लोगों ने लड़ा उससे और कहा कि नहीं, हम आपको नहीं आने देंगे इस पे, और फिर हम लड़ करके उसको जीते। लेकिन वो बहुत छोटा म्यूनसिपाल्टी है, 2.5 लाख के पॉपुलेशन वाला है, तो काफ़ी सब लोग मंत्री संत्री सब रहते हैं वहीं पे, तो वहाँ पे तो हम उनको वो कर पाए। लेकिन ये संभव नहीं है कि हर जगह लड़ाई करना पड़ेगा। इसलिए मैं आपसे अपील करना चाहता हूँ कि एक्ट की मांग होनी चाहिए इस देश में, कि आप सॉलिड वेस्ट मैनेजमेंट के लिए आप एक्ट बनाओ इस देश में, क्योंकि रूल्स से जो है नहीं फुलफिल हुआ। 2016 से लेकर के 2024 आ गया, आपको 10% भी उसका इम्प्लीमेंटेशन नहीं हुआ। खासतौर पे जो एमआरएफ जिसकी बात क्लेम कर रहा है, दिल्ली के नगर पालिका, दिल्ली की ही बात करें, एक नगर पालिका, उसमें जो है आप एमआरएफ में किसी भी एमआरएफ में जाइए, 162 एमआरएफ बोल रहा है ये लोग कि हम बनाए हैं, किसी भी एमआरएफ पे मटेरियल रिकवरी सेंटर नहीं बना है। वो बना है सिर्फ वेस्ट ट्रांसफर स्टेशन, और वहां से जो वैल्यूबल वेस्ट है उसको जो है सेग्रीगेट करने का जो है उन्होंने सिस्टम बनाया है। लेकिन वेट वेस्ट जिसकी कंपोजिशन 50% है पूरे वेस्ट के क्वांटम में, उसके लिए कोई बात ही नहीं करता है। जबकि जबकि आपको साउथ के शहरों में जाइए, आप बंगलोर में जाइए, तो बंगलोर म्यूनसिपालिटी ने जो है अलग से जो है सेटअप बनाया है, सब हर वार्ड में आपको वेस्ट कंपोस्टिंग के लिए हर वार्ड में बनाया है। DWCC भी बनाया है, ड्राई वेस्ट कलेक्शन सेंटर भी बनाया है, साथ में कंपोस्ट सेंटर भी बनाया है, और उसका दोनों वेस्ट को अलग अलग सेग्रीगेट होकर के उठ के जाता है, और वहाँ पे उसका प्रोसेस होता है, ड्राई का भी और वेट का भी। और ये वहाँ का नगर पालिका ने बनाया है, ये हमने नहीं बनाया, चाहे ये कोई प्राइवेट आइडेंटिटी ने नहीं बनाया है। कलेक्शन का काम जो है जरूर कर रहा है प्राइवेट आइडेंटिटी, लेकिन डेवलप किया है वहाँ के म्यूनसिपालिटी ने। और यहाँ पे तो हालत ये है कि आपको सब प्राइवेट ही कर रहे हैं। आप बायोमाइनिंग करना है लैंडफिल का तो प्राइवेट कर रहे हैं, आपको गाड़ी चलवाना है तो प्राइवेट कर रहे हैं, आपको जो है कचरे का एनर्जी में कन्वर्ट करना है प्राइवेट चल रहा है। अब हम सब लोग जानते हैं इस बात को कि जब 2000 में 1999 में यहाँ पे वेस्ट टू एनर्जी प्लांट लगा और उस फेल हुआ वेस्ट टू एनर्जी प्लांट ओखला का, तो उसके ऊपर रिव्यू हुआ, और रिव्यू में ये तय हुआ कि भाई यहाँ के जो वेस्ट का करेक्ट वो है मतलब करेक्टराइजेशन है, उसमें 900 से 1300 कैलोरीफिक वैल्यू जनरेट हो सकता है वेस्ट से। और कूड़ा से चाहे किसी भी तरह से वेस्ट को एनर्जी में बदलने के लिए आपको 3300 कैलोरीफिक वैल्यू चाहिए हैं, तो इस वजह से वो फेल हो गया। और उसके बाद यहाँ पे अभी लगातार जो है 3-4 जो है वेस्ट एनर्जी प्लांट लग गया, और उसमें कौन सा गुणात्मक जो है बदलाव हो गया। अब यदि 50% यदि ऑर्गेनिक वेस्ट है और ऑर्गेनिक वेस्ट का रिकवरी कंपोस्ट में 15% होता है, इसका मतलब कि 85% उसमें पानी है, तो 50% में से आपको 85% पानी है। और यदि कोई कहे कि हम एनर्जी बना रहे हैं, तो ये बात तो साफ है कि भाई पानी में आप आग लगाने की बात कर रहे हो, सीधे सी बात है, पानी में आग लगा रहे हो आप और लोगों को आंख में धूल झोंक रहे हो, क्योंकि एनर्जी बन ही नहीं सकता है। एनर्जी तो तब बनेगा जब आपका वेस्ट का प्रॉपर सेग्रीगेशन होगा, और वो प्रॉपर सेग्रीगेशन तो है नहीं, सब मिक्स वेस्ट जा रहा है। 30% वेस्ट है जो रिसाइकेबल्स है, और उसका सेग्रीगेशन हो ही नहीं रहा है, और सेग्रीगेशन हो रहा है तो एनर्जी प्लांट में नहीं जा रहा है वो, ये बात सही है। तो इसीलिए जो दिल्ली की जो पहला एनर्जी प्लांट है वेस्ट एनर्जी प्लांट, उसके जो ऑनर हैं वो कई बार क्लेम कर चुके हैं कि हमको तो 2000 टन वेस्ट को जलाने के लिए 3 डीजल टैंक लगाना पड़ा है, तो उस एनर्जी का हम क्या करेंगे। यदि मान लीजिए कि एक एनर्जी को बनाने के लिए एक दूसरा एनर्जी हम लगा रहे हैं, तो फिर उसके एनर्जी का क्या वैल्यू हो गया रह गया। तो ये तो आंख में धूल झोंकने वाली बात हो गई। तो सच्चाई में यही हो रहा है। शुक्रिया, मैं अपने बातें यहीं पे ख़त्म करता हूँ, और मैं उम्मीद करता हूँ कि हमारे जो कंसर्न है, हमारी जो सवाल है, उस पर आप सब लोग जो है ज़रूर सोचेंगे, और आप लोग हमको मदद करेंगे, हमारे समाज को मदद करेंगे। और इसी आशा उम्मीद के साथ शुक्रिया आप सब लोगों को, आपको बुलाने के लिए धन्यवाद।
थैंक यू शशि जी, आपने इतना हमें ग्राउंड डिटेल्स दिया। आई मीन व्हाट शशि जी वाज आल्सो टेलिंग अस अबाउट दैट हाउ I've also myself spoken to so many engineers and bureaucrats, and they often tell us that we do not get good waste in cities. So here by good waste they mean recyclable waste. Whereas when we get wet waste, India is a country where we get more of wet waste. Wet waste is actually good in a way that we can easily compost it, but unfortunately many of our bureaucrats and engineers think that we need more of recyclable waste, and for incinerators we need dry waste for high calorific values, but we also know the flip side of incinerators. Okay, so thank you everyone for attending today's policy forum. You've heard speakers speak about the waste crisis from various lenses. We had Ravi, who spoke about the political economy and the political ecology of materials, and he told us that how the materiality of materials, of discarded materials, directly affect informal workers. Then we had Professor Kaveri speaking about medium hill towns, and she told us about the glaring realities of implementation of Swachh Bharat in that particular town. And then we had Rahul, who spoke about the manipulation of rankings through such survection. And then finally we had Shashiji giving us such amazing ground realities. So now that all of you have heard about various aspects of waste management and waste crisis across the country, I will open the house for discussion if you have any questions, or if you think that we can collectively deliberate upon what can be the probable policy outcomes, or maybe challenge some of the propositions which have been proposed here. So very happy to discuss that. Yeah.
Already over time.
Okay, but maybe we can have some
5 minutes max.
Is anybody else like coming?
Others might have other things to do.
I mean, maybe they can, if somebody wants to leave, they can leave, but we can have 15-20 minutes of discussion. Yeah, so if you all have any questions or any suggestions. Yeah.
I actually had a question for all the discussions rather. So there was this discussion regarding how there is a segregation of waste, but also a segregation of work per se also. Like who does the waste work per se and who prohibit themselves from indulging in such work. So from an ontological perspective also, from what we consider as we discuss the categories of good waste and bad waste, from different people with different subject positions have different ideas about those ways, and thus different social and political conditions also create the hierarchy of work where certain sections of the society are confined to particular works, and these works are then further, as you said, is perpetuated by the state actors and state policies per se. You discuss a smart cities mission, and the other how in urban governance, there is this techno-managerial approach where they try to fix this problem per se of waste work through techno-managerial approaches like digitization, privatization of the services. And you said that there is also increasing trend of formalization of waste work. My question is it really the formalization of waste work? Then if it is formalization, it would mean that the informal workers per se are backed into are given formal rights, like Sir said, are demanded for a rights-based approach towards waste work. So the formalization of waste work would rather mean that informal workers are involved in that. But we see that that's not the case. Rather, this is the case of purely corporatization of the waste work, which, as Kaveri ma'am, you highlighted through a Himalayan, you discussed about how urban-rural transitions. So there is increasing encroachment of these common pool resources, and which is also creating impoverishment risk, which is creating migration as to the urban centers per se to further look for waste work and involve in waste work. So in that sense, sir, first of all, my question was, is it really formalization or corporatization? And secondly, also you talked about the rust, how states are competing to get funds or get the rankings. There is a race to have higher rankings per se, and different states with different positions have whether they want to indulge it or they don't want to indulge it. So in this thing, is it the gaming behavior that you talked about? It also leads to the thing that there is a victim state and there is a state which has more privilege. Then, so I agree to that per se, but don't you think that also sticking to that narrative leads to the risk that we forget how even the victim state in that race can lead to more dispossession of people involved in waste workers, not just in terms of physical displacement, but also in terms of their involvement or their subjectivity to that waste and waste resources per se, which helps also explain.
Thanks a lot. I think to take your first question, that was exactly the point of what I was trying to say, that these attempts to so-called formalize the workers. So in a sense, that entire sector, urban planning, all of it is by nature, the running through it is this theme of formality. So we can read it in various ways, but the operation of the state, the implementation of things, how things are happening is ever greater in a sense in formalization. So that was precisely the point being made there. And I want to say one thing, that in terms of this, one thing that comes across in all our presentations and ending with Shashiji is the enduring reality is how caste plays out in the realm of waste handling and management and disposal. That no matter what differences you see in the policy space and what has undertaken, if you go down to the ground reality is who is tackling the waste hand on this thing, whatever categories of workers they are. Finally, if you go into what communities and social identities are dealing with it, it has remained enduring. And here I want to mention the work of a book that came out, Waste of a Nation, Garbage and Growth in India by Asa Doron and Robin Jeffrey, where they talked a lot about, waste as voluntary work and a Gandhian notion. And then there were a lot of Dalit scholars who really raised the question that in a way, there's a whitewashing of who are the workers engaged. So I do want to reiterate that in my work here in the Himalayan hill town and in all of our work, if you go down, whether it's private, whether it's public, whether it's formal, whether it's informal, the actual handling of waste is carried out by certain categories of workers. And that is an enduring reality in India, and we also have to think about that when we are talking about, it has remained as enduring as, when we look at, sanitary, the workers going, into sewage and all of that kind of. And despite all the laws and the bans and everything, this is a fact. So that I just wanted to reiterate out here. And that is completely whitewashed out of a lot of narratives about workers in this sector. Particularly, I would say for wet waste. So as you aggregate up, there'll be other kinds of actors, but that, of course, I talk about in the book and everybody has spoken. But in terms of handling at the starting point and all, you will see that.
Yeah, just building on what Professor Kaveri said. So yes, with respect to wet waste, we still have workers mostly from the Muslim community, although there are lots of Muslim workers as well these days, at least as part of Delhi's sanitation workforce. But an interesting change is happening now is that when you look at Delhi's informal waste pickers, a lot of them are Bengali Muslims. That's what I was telling my students in the class other day as well, that now they can reap value out of waste, right? Which was not necessarily the case with sanitation workers or Safai Karamcharis. So what is happening is that now we see that it's not just workers from Dalit communities, it's workers from a lot of Bengali Muslims, Hindu OBCs, Muslim OBCs. They're actively engaging in this economy. A lot of them might have the options to take up factory work or domestic work. So, I mean, there is this whole precarity to it, and also the other kinds of works are also very precarious, right? But this waste to value phenomena is also leading to a lot of changes in caste dynamics that are taking place, because maybe you can have a look at Dana Kornberg's work. She's published and her articles are there in EPW. She tells us that how a lot of Valmiki workers who've been, and I'm really sorry to use this word, but in Delhi's waste economy, so there's this term called Jamadar, right? So when you look at informal waste pickers, especially Northwest Delhi, you see that there are lots of Bengali Muslims who are collecting the garbage as informal workers, and behind them are the supervisors walking. So there is a very interesting hierarchy playing out there, that the person from Valmiki community is bossing around Bengali Muslim, right? But also there's this act, it's a form of subversion when that person is taking a step back and saying that I'm not going to touch this material because it's stigmatizing and somebody else is doing that. So within that very micro space, there is a caste subversion going on, but of course there is a whole political economy to it. So it
It is as a Parna, so we can use the term marginalized community in a broader sense within these finer. About the segregation question, I would love to see some large scale studies on how much it is happening. Because although this time in this medium hill town, they suddenly told me everything is being segregated, I really am a bit doubtful in the Indian context to what degree this is going on where, and maybe the others can hold forth on this question.
So I'll just respond to that, surveillance question that you had. So I don't see them as sort of victim cities and perpetrator cities. I don't think that's the best takeaway for that. What I was trying to show you is sort of the pointlessness of the whole exercise, right? That one is that it's an imperfect way to actually try and motivate any number of cities. But in addition to that, there are cities that are actually uninterested in participation and are going to be demotivated further because of the ranking. In fact, and to your point, some of the cities that perform very badly on the ranking are precisely the cities that are actually doing well on waste management, which are many cities in Kerala. It is just that they have, what they do well is not captured by the rankings. And so they have lost interest a long time back. West Bengal has lost interest because of political reasons. So they don't participate in the rankings at all. Most of the complaints that I got from southern Indian states saying that and that might be a climate thing also, but they've been doing sort of either local biogas digestion, Kerala, there are lots of these digesters in various houses. They have been trying to, but when you measure something by the number of trucks, the number of dustbins, the number of employees, the amount of money being spent, and sort of kind of think about it as the more infrastructure you have, the more points you get, then you're not going to capture the reality of a lot of cities that are actually doing waste management well. Because when you do it well, you don't need that many trucks. You need fewer trucks. So yes, I think there is a point about putting unequal cities on the same footing, and I think that points to the lack of a good design around the rankings. And of course, the ranking system has, within 1 lakh size cities, 10 lakh size cities, it has those demarcations. But even within that, you have a lot of variation in the sense of the kind of resources that cities have. If their tax collection is better, then they're just going to do better. If they have a very motivated, if they're a tourist town, but they're a small town, then they're going to have more revenue coming in and more interest from the state government in terms of appointing a good commissioner. Right? But if a similar sized industrial town that nobody visits, or random town that doesn't have any kind of particular appeal, it's not going to have that kind of revenue coming in. So I think that's the takeaway. I'm not seeing them as victims as such. I'm seeing it as a pointless exercise.
Are there any further comments? Yes, what?
Hi, my name is Muzammil Yaqub. I'm a PhD scholar at IIT Delhi. And my question, but a rather incoherent comment is, So you talked about Himalayan towns and all. I work on Himalayan towns. I'm from Kashmir, and my work primarily relates to Srinagar City, urban planning and policy stuff. So because you talked a lot about Ananya Roy's work and informality kind of rubric through which we understand these processes of urban policy evolution and stuff. I was wondering, I am not an expert on waste management, so I would rather speak about urban policy in general and how these phenomena evolve and operate in our cities. Not only in the Himalayan cities, but in the cities of global south overall. So I was wondering, I'm not very much convinced by the idea of informality as an overarching framework through which we understand these phenomena, be it waste management or spatial segregation or planning of any area and stuff. Through my research on Srinagar City, I have been able to kind of explore and investigate into the phenomena of spatial segregation especially, where I saw, some of my colleagues, some of my seniors have termed it as an informality kind of a phenomena that's growing, but it does not really even work on that kind of an extent. And when you speak about waste management in the Himalayan towns, it pretty much followed the similar kind of a pattern. It's not always the lack of legislation, the lack of willingness to deal with the subject. Rather, when the legislation comes in, as you clearly put it, you said that the waste segregation might be happening, it's supposedly happening in the area now, but you are doubtful that it's not like you're not sure to what extent it's happening, and you want a large scale study on that. So I mean, I'm also like perplexed by that on that point, that when the legislation has come enforced in these areas, in these to regulate these phenomena, why are we still skeptical about, I mean, calling it a formalized kind of an enterprise or a phenomena? So do we, because you also speak about informal formality. So I mean, that kind of again raises a point that there is something that exists that is neither formal nor informal. It's like in between these two or goes beyond these two. We don't know. But I would want, I mean, if you can really respond to that, I would want to know if we really need to talk about this informality or informal formality, or we need to go beyond these rubrics, beyond what Ananya Roy has proposed, and understand these and many other phenomena in these fields. It does not just like restrict itself to the waste management phenomenon, but any other phenomena in the cities of global south, especially in Indian cities in particular. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a wonderful question. And here I just want to say that it's really my disciplinary background and training that brought me to bear on this question. So in economics, one of the most enduring models, mainstream economics, is about the urban informal sector and dualism. And it's quite dated now, but it still holds as much sway. There's this whole notion that, you know, this entire sector is going to be subsumed into the formal at some point as a country or, place develops, right? So first, the whole notion of the informal sector comes up with Keith Hart going to visit Kenya and seeing that there are people doing work and you cannot put them in the category of formally unemployed. How do you explain this phenomena? There's no welfare state. There's this whole category, right? And the dualism models in economics, Harris, Todaro, and so forth, they all are coming up with this as a very category. So my original interest, and as I shared that my book itself and the entire research was looking at the question of informal labor, with waste just being one subsector. So in terms of this category of informal, now coming to Ananya Roy's work in terms of, urbanization and planning and everything, here I'm using the rubric of informality, her categorization and my own experience of it, that as far as workers are concerned, for sure, there's ever greater immiseration, ever greater informality. Exactly as Shashiji said, they are being pushed ever to the margins. And in fact, there's more radical scholars like Kanyal Sanyal, Rajesh Bhattacharya and all, and they are talking about that Gidwani and all have picked up on you're talking about surplus labor, right? That is not picked up while the capital accumulation carries on. So you're basically throwing out this category of worker constantly, in terms of the so-called process of development. So in that sense, I would very much say that what I wanted to dwell on is that still in India, we are also carrying on. We use the word informal sector because that's how also we collect data on the workers in the economy. The State of India working reports that come out of Azim Premji University that has all the economists working, they are also using the word informal sector. So that is the how we measure also. Right. So in that category, I would say I have used this particular, framework because I'm also myself interested in the question that, these moves towards privatization, formalization, because what does the category connote for us in our minds? In the Indian waste context, I'm sorry to say, but the conversation still hovers around whether they have gloves and gumboots and, are they protected or not? And somehow that is seen as what is, the formal would promise them. So I think in that context, and I just want to read out, the last part of my Journal of Developing Societies piece, because that really sets more concretely, I think about this. So that is so to say that instead the disingenuous trope of the environment is shown to legitimize policy changes such as the market informalization of the formal, of the management of solid waste, and of the labor engaged in this endeavor. As I've shown in previous research, how informal waste workers, especially in the past decade, increasingly form surplus labor in the need economy, as hypothesized by Bhattacharya and Sanyal, toiling in ever more miserating conditions in the informal waste system. This article focused on the formal waste sector, that is the urban local bodies and those working for a long time for the urban local body, on which there is surprisingly little research attention. I've shown how their working conditions have changed for the worse, exactly as Aparna said, even as the environment is invoked as the reason for restructuring the waste sector. The case study shows not just subcontraction by the urban local body to a physically distant company and to the refugee organization when it can, but also complete deregulation, both of compliance to solid waste management norms, as well as of work conditions of the previously formal and now informalized sweepers reporting to the sanitary supervisor. There is ambivalence about who is culpable if the town remains for days with highly visible, uncollected and unsegregated dumped waste. There is opacity as regards how many workers the company actually deploys on the ground and what it pays them, vis-a-vis what is said on the contract with the urban local body, itself not a document that is easily procured. And there is exemption in the sense that the conditions of work under the company are far worse than they were in the informal waste system, yet allowed with impunity, when better conditions in the informal waste system were seen to require rectification by formalizing and organizing them. Therefore, to paraphrase Roy, the waste policy and practice sphere show how India's urbanization and planning regime is itself an informal entity, a state of deregulation, ambivalence, opacity, and exemption. So I've categorized it very, very clearly, but I would argue if you are looking at Srinagar's waste system, then we have to add a whole other layer of, segregation in another sense, security concerns, and many, many other things that, that I think really overlay. And of course, Rahul's here and is a better place to speak about, state and all of this.
Thank you. Thank you. That helps.
Thank you, Kaveri. Any last comments or questions?
Nature was missing, so I thought to add that component. So a bit of trivia first. While we are discussing so much about waste and whole political, economic, and other dynamics, 60% or probably 65% now of us, we live only on 3% of terrestrial area. And for that sake, Suresh and I are teaching urban development and environment at the Ambedkar. And in the classes, I came up with a new definition for urban. So we have not created an ecosystem too. So US invested $200 million and they failed. Elon is trying, fingers crossed. So when you have not created an ecosystem too, then urban is that facet of ecosystem where we have high, uncharacteristically high human presence, which requests a very unique flow of energy and resource from source to sink. Nowhere else you have this phenomena that source se sink ki taraf aata ho, energy supply, humans, and you have control of the sink on the source. So once you have this, you achieve this or you achieve these kind of milestones on 3% terrestrial area by subsuming this resource components. So what I was trying to sum up in terms of all these arguments is that probably we also need a lens to go out of this whole system. And the waste problems are not waste problems, they are urban problems. So we are recycling our urban problems and waste problems. So the moment we listen of Harappa, the moment we listen of fantastic urban systems in Italia, हर जगह यही था that you relegate your waste to a different place. Unfortunately, हमारे पास वो जगह कम पड़ गई है, तो you see mountains of waste these days. But we are so reliant on natural forces. Even your sewage treatment is reliant on microorganisms who treat your sewage. Sun is providing the baking systems for all these landfill systems layer after layer. So creation of this subsumed factions of the society, sorry, my social science is weak, is not a news to me who looks at this from a systemic perspective. So the moment we go too much deep into it and we try and project only our own vision point, we miss the larger picture. It's like the blind scholars who wanted to explain an elephant, and everybody was trying to hold one piece. Somebody thought that it's a rope, the other said it's a tree, somebody said it's a fan. So we have already made that mistake with our settlement on this planet. We have made that mistake in terms of creating the urban, and probably if we are discussing the waste, it's the one and the same thing. So, thank you.
Thank you, Nishant, and I really want to reiterate the point. I would also say it's a disciplinary call, right? Because I would say here economics has a disproportionate blame also, because all environmental issues have always been put forth as an externality, right? You have just seen it as something that is external to what is going on. And now we are living in an age where this can no longer carry on. So somehow we have to think about the so-called environment, nature, that whole huge question. And yet, if you look at capitalism and the growth, and I would say sheer unbridled capitalism that is going on. Even I think one of the panelists spoke about the coloniality of the dumping of waste. If you look at these plastic rules, it's all very great for the West to now wake up and talk about the UN rules after they've, and even to date, right? If you look at their rules about not in my backyard and all of this and what are the implications, and my ex-professor at Cambridge, Hajun Chang, is looking at his latest work is very interesting. It's about the colonial roots of development in terms of how, when we talk about states and countries doing very well, what is whitewashed out of it all slavery, XYZ, all the conditions that underwrote that, right? So in the waste question, the present consumption that is going on and that is carrying on, and we are also, after COVID, we are looking at 2 wars in the Middle East and in Ukraine, and nobody, that 1.5 degrees centigrade, I don't know what's happened to it, but the point being that, as Nishant is saying, we cannot think about all this as a kind of, just standalone. But that's how it is, right? And now in the global south, for India and China, for sure, we are catching up in the consumption, just the absolute numbers. And the hills and all is no exception, and nature and
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kaveri. Thank you, Nishant. And I completely agree with Nishant. I mean, now we have Jason Moore's scholarship who says that it's not Anthropocene anymore. It's either Capitalocene or Wastocene, and more Wastocene because matter is at the center of all the changes. That is, I mean, of course, there is a human interaction, but how material and human interaction are shaping the changes around us. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. It was a great discussion. Thank you all the speakers. Thank you Rahul. Thank you Kaveri. Thank you Shashiji, and Ravi is not here. And for all your comments. Hopefully we can come up with more. We can deliberate more as we go back home and think about the issues. Thank you.
Yes, yes.